Layla's blood was slowly drying on the cracked ground, mixed with dust and silence. The skin on her face burned where the hardest blow had been struck. Her mouth, cut, could barely open. The sun burned mercilessly upon her, and the dry air seemed to tear at her lungs. Every breath hurt as if her chest were filled with stones. She had been dragged to that field by soldiers shouting words she didn't fully understand, but she recognized the tone of hatred. Traitor, collaborator, that was all she heard before the first blow. Now lying there, alone, bruised, with no strength left to cry, she just waited for the end. But then, something changed. A shadow appeared over her face. A figure was limping toward her, his hand covered in blood. Layla's eyes slowly opened, and what she saw took her breath away. It was a man in an Israeli uniform, his uniform torn, his face covered in blood and dust. He knelt beside her, wordlessly removing his backpack, dampening a cloth and gently stroking her face. Layla tried to turn her head. "Are you going to kill me too?" she whispered. He took a deep breath. "No, I came to save you." It was the driest summer in years. The hills of the West Bank seemed covered in ash. There was no grass, no bird song, only the roar of helicopters crossing the sky and the smell of smoke that burned the air. The white stone houses were silent, their windows covered by dust-stained curtains. Every alleyway seemed to hide the memory of fear. Walls covered in graffiti, broken doors, children who no longer played. Layla lived there, in that suspended silence, trying to go unnoticed. She was the daughter of teachers, used to books and notebooks, not interrogations. But one damn denunciation was enough. One word thrown to the wind. They said she was helping the rebels. They said she was hiding messages. No one wanted to hear the answer. The soldiers invaded her house at dawn. They tore up her sheets. They tore everything. And she, without understanding, was kidnapped, interrogated, tied up, tortured, then thrown into the field like someone discarding a useless object. The heat seared his skin. Time stood still. And then, in the middle of the arid vastness, he appeared, also wounded, also lost. An Israeli soldier separated from his troops, with something deeper than fear in his eyes. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. Layla was 22 years old. Her skin was olive, her eyes dark and deep like a moonless night, the kind of gaze that seemed to carry centuries of silent pain. She was the daughter of educators, raised among ancient books, Arabic poetry, and stories that spoke of freedom and resistance. In the village, she was known for wearing her hair tied back with a hand-embroidered scarf, and for possessing a bravery that belied her fragile figure. She never raised her voice, but she never lowered her head. When the soldiers arrested her, she didn't scream. She simply stared into their eyes. It was that gaze that kept her alive until then, even with her swollen face and trembling hands. On the other side was Eli, a 31-year-old Israeli, his uniform stained with blood, sand, and regret. He was an army paramedic, but he hated war. Years before, he had lost his brother in an attack, and ever since, he carried the guilt of not having been able to save him. His superiors said he was weak, distracted, too sensitive for the uniform. But he carried on, not out of ideology, but out of lack of options. That morning, Eli had been hit by shrapnel and had become separated from the group. Limping, disoriented, with a bleeding leg and blurred vision, he stumbled upon Layla's body like someone finding a broken mirror in the middle of the desert. She was still breathing, barely, but she was alive. He stood there, staring at her. He could have left her there, walked away, but something about that wounded face held him captive. He knelt with difficulty. He took off his backpack. He took out a canteen. Layla tried to crawl and let out a weak moan. "Do not touch me," he said with a broken voice. Eli didn't respond. She simply moistened a cloth and gently touched his face. His hands were shaking. "You need help," he murmured. He opened his eyes with difficulty. He saw the insignia on his chest, and he spat on the ground. "You are one of them. I'm a man, and you're hurt." There was a thick silence, one of those screaming silences. She hesitated, but didn't remove her hand. For the first time, Layla didn't feel pain. She felt something more dangerous: doubt. Eli tore off a piece of his shirt, tied it to the wound, and offered her water. She eyed the canteen suspiciously and drank slowly, never taking her eyes off him. At that moment, both ceased to be symbols, enemies, functions, and they became what they truly were: two broken souls, trying to survive where only hate existed. The sun was already beginning to set when Eli realized he couldn't stay there much longer. They were too exposed. The field was clear, and any drone, any patrol could spot them. He looked around, struggled to his feet, and stood. His leg ached, but he still obeyed. He returned to Layla and held her in his arms as if harboring a promise or a mistake. She tried to resist. "Let me go. I don't need you." "Yes, you do, and I need you too," he replied without looking. They walked to an old abandoned building on the outskirts, a bombed-out school, now covered in rubble and silence. It was the only shelter there. He laid her down on a makeshift blanket and carefully lit a small fire. The sky was darkening rapidly. The sounds of the night came with more tension than relief. Inside the destroyed school, only his breathing could be heard, long and heavy, and the thoughts that screamed inside me. Layla watched Eli's every move, every gesture. He didn't look like a soldier. There was something broken about him, something familiar. Still, suspicion loomed large. She wondered, why help me? Why now? For his part, the dilemmas also silently gnawed at him. He knew that if they found him with her, he would be tried for treason, but something inside him screamed louder than the orders, perhaps a vestige of humanity, perhaps a deep weariness of war. They barely slept that night. At every outside noise, they both held their breath. The tension was like a taut wire about to snap. In the morning, the dilemma took shape. Layla sat up, moaning in pain. "Are you going to hand me over? Are you going to take me to your base?" Eli shook his head. "No, but I can't go back either. So you're going to die here with me?" He looked into her eyes and for the first time smiled. "I've been dead for a long time." The two left school before noon. They walked side by side, trying to avoid the paths. Between rocks and dry trails, they moved slowly. Eli was still limping. Layla was still bleeding. But there was something invisible between them, a fragile thread of affection. In the middle of the afternoon, they heard voices. Armed men approached. 3, maybe 4. The flag they wore sewn onto their clothing was Palestinian. They weren't seen together. Eli looked at her. "Run. I'm staying." "No. You saved me. I won't abandon you now." It was already too late. The men emerged from between the rocks with weapons in hand. "Layla? Are you alive?" "Who's that? An Israeli pig?" His heart was beating fast. He was the brother of a childhood friend. She recognized him by the scar on his cheek. She knew he was the leader of a small rebel group. She also knew he would kill Eli without a second thought. She was standing in front of him, her arms open. "He saved me. He took care of me. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead." The men hesitated. One of them approached with anger in his eyes. "Layla, it's the enemy. How many of us do you think he's killed?" He felt the ground disappear. His body still ached, but now his heart ached more. "And how many of us have killed them? Where will all this end?" The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them lowered his weapon. "We'll take you to the camp. The commander decides what to do." Eli silently, simply nodded. Layla instinctively grabbed his hand. There was fear in that contact, but also something new. Something neither of them dared to call love yet. But in the silence between one threat and another, it was already beginning to emerge. The sun was beginning to set when they reached the rebel camp. The tension was sharp in the dry desert air. Layla and Eli were surrounded by suspicious glances, knives hidden under their clothes, and weapons visible. Every step they took seemed to resonate like a war drum in their chests. The commander, a man hardened by years of battle, stared at Eli, then at Layla, searching their faces for any sign of betrayal or truth. The crowd waited, agitated and silent at the same time. Words could start a fire or extinguish it forever. "Why should I trust an Israeli soldier?" roared one of the younger rebels. "Didn't you kill our people?" Eli, his breath ragged with pain, raised his voice with unexpected firmness. "I didn't come here to fight. I came because I saw the pain in your eyes, because I lost someone too. I'm not your enemy." Layla, still weak but with renewed inner strength, spoke with a firm voice. "He saved my life. He took care of me when no one else would. If anyone deserves punishment, it's me, for trusting someone I'm supposed to hate." The commander frowned, considering. At that moment, hurried footsteps were heard. A group of Israeli soldiers was approaching dangerously. Chaos broke out. Some rebels raised their weapons, ready to fight or flee. But Eli, with an act of courage, stood in front of Layla. "It doesn't matter who comes. If they want to kill me, let it be here, in front of everyone. But don't let this fear destroy what is just beginning between us." The words echoed throughout the camp. The commander, with a mixture of respect and distrust, slowly lowered his weapon. "There may be hope," he murmured, "but it will be our decision what to do with you." At that moment, Layla and Eli looked at each other, aware that their fight was just beginning, but that together they could face any storm. The following days were a confusing mix of silence and contained tension. Layla and Eli, though free for the moment, remained prisoners of time and the mistrust that still weighed on them. The others at camp watched them with eyes that didn't know whether to forgive or condemn. Each dawn brought a new dilemma. Would they be able to overcome the invisible barriers that war and hatred had built? In the small shelter where they were housed, Layla tended to Eli's wounds, as he had done for her. Her hands, clumsy at first, became careful, almost reverent, as she cleaned each cut and bandaged each bruise. In those moments, the silence was heavy, but filled with unspoken words, with feelings trying to break through. Eli, for his part, began to talk little by little about his life, about his fallen brother, about his doubts and fears. Layla listened, surprised by the humanity she found in this man who should have been her enemy. Sometimes a shy smile appeared between them, a gesture that escaped before being discovered. However, the reality outside the camp was harsh and merciless. Enemy patrols ceased, the bombings grew ever closer, and the echo of violence seemed to engulf them all. Layla knew their time was limited, that this truce couldn't last forever. One night, as the moon dimly illuminated the desert, Layla sat by the campfire and looked into Eli's eyes. "Do you think this could work?" he asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. Eli took her hand, warm despite the cold of the night. "I don't know, but if we don't try, what's left for us?" She nodded slowly, feeling a thread of hope woven between them, fragile but real. But just as they were beginning to dream of a different future, a messenger came running into the camp. He brought news that would change everything. Enemy reinforcements were approaching, and the camp's defense was imminent. The moment of decision was near. As the community prepared for battle, Layla and Eli exchanged a final glance filled with unspoken promises. They knew that what happened next would shape not only their lives, but the fate of those who still believed in the possibility of peace. Do you think love can survive in the midst of hate? Comment below if you think two broken souls can rebuild together, even when all seems lost. This story is just beginning.